Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I have my May wrap up, so let's just get right into it. So I actually filmed and edited this entire video last week and just absolutely hated every single thing about it, so hopefully this time goes a little bit better. But I really did not have a great reading month in May. That's sort of been an ongoing trend for me over the past couple months, which hasn't been great, to be honest, and just kind of is what it is. But I had a couple disappointments this month that were like really big ones for me because two of my most anticipated books of the year I read this month and didn't like either of them, so that was definitely a huge letdown. So I think I read 9 books this month, so let's just get into those. So I mentioned in my previous wrap-up that I was rereading the Seabreeze series by Abbi Glines, kind of hoping that maybe it would get me out of my sort of slumpy mood that I've been in. And I kind of mentioned in that wrap-up that I wasn't really feeling the first book this time around, and I kind of felt that same way with the next book that I picked up, which was Because of Low, which is the second book in the series. And I think these have just like passed their time for me. Like, they were great when I read them when I was just getting into romance, but they're just not what I'm looking for anymore. This book in particular I think relies heavily on a sort of like plot twist that's in it to make the book interesting. And because I already knew what that was, I felt like I was building up to nothing. Like, I didn't really love it as much this time around. This book follows Marcus and Lo. You see Marcus in the first book. He is working at the sort of mansion that the girl in that book is working at for the rock star that she ends up dating, and he kind of has a thing for that girl, but she chooses the rock star guy. And so now this is his book, and he is sort of falling for the best friend of his roommate, but his roommate kind of keeps saying that he's going to marry this girl, and he's kind of trying to figure out what their relationship is because this guy seems to sleep around all the time. So he's like, okay, if this is the girl you're going to marry, like, why are you out with all these random girls all the time? And sort of kind of has like a best friend's little sister thing, I guess. I mean, they're not really like best friends, they're just roommates, but it kind of has that vibe to the story. I found this time around I didn't like Marcus so much, just like as a person or a character. I don't know why, something about him was just giving me bad vibes. It kind of reminded me of like the first time I watched Gilmore Girls. I was Team Dean. I thought he was like perfect for Rory and like, you know, just like the best boyfriend for her. And then watching it the next time around, I was like, okay, Dean's actually a jerk. Like the second time I rewatched the whole series, and I just like didn't pick up on that the first time. But that's kind of how I felt with this, was I was like, you know, I really don't like him. I don't know why I liked him the first time, but didn't really love this one. Then I ended up picking up the third one, While It Lasts, which I've reread a couple times actually because it is a farm romance and I just love like a small town book. And this one I have picked up, like I said, a couple times and enjoyed it like every time I've reread it, but this time I just wasn't feeling it again. I found the guy in this was really annoying. He was very much like, oh, I'm gonna go find myself a sorority girl in a tiny bikini, and like that was like all he cared about, and I was just kind of like over that, I guess. And so I didn't love this one, unfortunately, as much as I have in the past, but I just decided to sort of end the series there because I kind of feel like I'm ruining it for myself. Like at one point I did really love it, and I don't want to keep ruining my like happy memories with the series with all of these new ones where I'm not liking it. So I did decide to stop there. Next, I read Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is one of the ones that was one of my most anticipated for the year that was just a huge letdown for me. And in hindsight, I probably should have known I wasn't going to like this. When I look back at Emily Henry's other books, I thought Beach Read was okay. I think I gave it 4 stars at the time because everybody was hyping it up and I kind of felt like I had to love it. But I think really it was probably like a 3-star read for me. It wasn't like my favorite thing of all time. It didn't really stick with me. But People We Meet on Vacation, I loved. I gave that one 5 stars, thought it was great. And then Happy Place, I hated. Like, I just straight up had to trudge through that book. It took me like 10 days to read it, which is like a very long amount of time for me. And I just felt like it was such a like women's fiction book. The romance was not the main plot line. The relationship between the main character and her sister seemed to be the like predominant relationship in the book. It wasn't between her and the guy. And I just really didn't like that. I didn't care about her sister. I didn't care about all of this other stuff that we were getting. And I felt like the romance really took a hit in that one. And that one I gave 3 stars because I said, you know what, like this was women's fiction, it wasn't romance. And I was hoping that Happy Place would kind of give me what I wanted from the other books that People We Meet on Vacation did give, but it just really didn't. I think this was actually the worst one in my opinion of Emily Henry's books. This one was 100% women's fiction. Like, there's no way I could spin this and say that this was a romance book, because it truly, truly was not. I felt like I was gonna love this. I really did. The premise was right up my alley. I love a good, like, lake house, summer vibes, like, beach read kind of thing. And this was, like, promising all that. But this book was such a downer. It was so depressing. It was not, like, a cutesy, like, beach read, which I know a lot of people said that about the actual beach read book. People were saying, like, this isn't, like, a light, fluffy kind of thing. But I just, like, wasn't expecting this to be so depressing. This book follows Harriet and Wynn, I think were their names, and they are going on this summer vacation to this lake house for, I think, like a week with their friend group that they've gone with every year, and the friend group doesn't know that they've broken up. And so they sort of plan that, like, only she's gonna go on the trip. He's gonna say he's busy working or whatever, but then he gets a call being like, no, this is our last, like, year to do this. You have to come for, like, one last time. And so he's like, fine, I'll be there. And so the two of them end up there together, and they have to pretend they're together. And I was really excited about that. Like I said, the plot line sounded right up my alley. I love, like, the fake dating when it's actually, like, necessary, and in this case, like, it would have been. And the first, like, 20-ish% of this book was great in that department. I felt like there was good tension. There was, like, some awkward moments where people were like, oh, of course you guys would, like, share a bed, like, why wouldn't you, kind of things. And I was like, okay, I like the direction this is headed, like, this is gonna be great, this is gonna be a 5-star read, like, people we meet on vacation. Like, I was so pumped. And then we seemed to just, like, fall off the wagon, like, right after that, because the entire rest of the book was just about the friend group and how, like, this one can't afford this, and this one has to get up early and doesn't like it, and this one has to work too many hours. And it was literally just an entire book about this friend group complaining about all their life problems, and I just really didn't care. Like, I didn't care about the friend group to begin with, and on top of that, I really didn't want to hear about their life problems because I didn't care. And we focused so little on the two main characters in this that I actually found myself repeatedly thinking while listening to this book, like, can we just get back to Harriet and Wynn? Because there were, like, entire chapters where I swear they weren't even mentioned. It was just, like, what these other friends were doing and where they wanted to go, and, like, I don't know, it was not good, to be honest. Like, and it was women's fiction. Like I said, the romance, very much backseat plot in this, like, definitely not the main plot. I don't know why they continue to push these books as romances, but this one, I think, really just, like, sealed the deal for me that, like, I will not be picking up Emily Henry's next book because they're women's fiction at this point, and they seem to just be getting more women's fiction than romance as time goes on, and I'm just not here for that. I mean, if you like women's fiction, you might like them. If you like depressing books, you might like them, but, like, just wasn't for me, and I am, like, tired of picking up her books, hyping them up, thinking they're gonna be great, and then being disappointed. So, like I said, this will be a last for me. Next, I read The Nanny by Lana Ferguson. I actually liked this one, which was kind of surprising. I've never heard of this author before. I'm pretty sure I've never read anything from her before, but I had seen a couple reviews for this floating around, and they were all pretty good, and I was like, you know what, I'll pick it up. It sounds decent. And this one follows a girl who in the past has worked on OnlyFans, and she has since, like, closed her account and has gotten a regular job. And this book starts out with her losing that job and kind of thinking, like, I don't really want to go back to OnlyFans, but, like, I need a job now and I can't afford rent and all this stuff. And she ends up finding an ad for a guy who is looking for a nanny for his kid, and he is also offering, like, a place to stay, like, she can live with them. And so she's like, this is great, he pays, like, good money, and he also, like, I won't have to pay rent because I'll be living with them. And so she's like, great, sounds good, like, goes to the interview. He ends up hiring her and taking the job, and the two of them are kind of getting closer. But as the reader, you know that the two of them were talking previously. He was one of her OnlyFans subscribers, but neither of them know that that's who the other one is. And so they're kind of, like, dancing around each other, not wanting to get involved, but also there's, like, this underlying sort of secret that you're waiting for to come out. And I did enjoy this one. I was surprised how much spice was in this for a traditionally published book. That's not something that is usually as, like, predominant, I find, in, like, traditionally published romances. But it was really good. I did enjoy this one. I thought it was kind of like what I was expecting Merry Little Meet Cute to be like, but, like, I think played out better than that book did. But I did enjoy this one. Next was another one of my highly anticipated books that was a huge, huge flop, and that was Meet Me at the Lake by Carley Fortune. I loved Every Summer After. I thought it was really, really cool that it had a good plot line, but it also took place in Ontario, which is where I live, so I just thought that was like a really cool book, and really, really loved it. Was really excited to see what the author was going to do next, and this was just, like I said, a massive, massive disappointment. I know I mentioned in my Goodreads review for this that part of the reason I didn't like this was personal, but there's also a lot that wasn't personal, so I'm going to start with the part that I just didn't like in general and then get into why it personally bothered me. This one follows Fern and Will, and Fern has moved from Muskoka, which is like a cottagey sort of small town-ish area here in Ontario. It's predominantly like cottagers, people that only go up in the summer, and then she moves to Toronto, which is like obviously like downtown Toronto, big city thing going on. And she moves to Toronto and thinks that it's just like the best thing in the world, it's the best thing that ever happened to anybody. And she meets this guy, Will, one day while she's working at a coffee shop. And he is painting a mural on the wall of the coffee shop that she's working in. And they get to talking and they spend like, I don't know, like 5 hours together. And they agree that they're going to meet up a year from then because he is flying out like the next day or something. So he's not going to be staying in the city. He's not from the city. And so they're like, okay, 1 year from today, we're going to meet up at the resort in Muskoka. And he's like, okay, cool. A year comes and goes and she is there and he doesn't show up. So she's kind of like, okay, he's a jerk. Like, he told me he was gonna meet me, he didn't come, whatever. And now it is 10 years later and he has shown up. Her mom has died and left her the resort, which she didn't want because, you know, she thinks the city's the greatest thing that's ever happened to the world. So she doesn't want to, you know, run this resort in Muskoka in like this small town and whatever. But he shows up there to like help her get the business back on track after her mom dies, and things sort of go from there. It's told in the same way as Every Summer After or People We Meet on Vacation or Love in Other Words, where they're alternating between the past and the present. But I will say that was my biggest like issue with this right off the bat, was I cannot stand when authors try to make like a second chance out of something that wasn't even a first chance. Like, these two literally spent like 1 day together. In the past, like, there was no relationship, there was no nothing. Like, they met for 1 day, they hung out, and then 10 years later, they were still like, no, I knew you were my soulmate. And I was like, okay, really? Like, that in itself was not interesting to me. And on top of that, like, if we're flashing back, I want to know, like, there has to be some sort of mystery. Like, okay, why didn't they stay together? Why did they break up? Why aren't they together now in the present? Whereas I feel like we knew that all along. Like, they weren't together because they never got together. Like, there was no sort of like mystery sort of thing with that. It was just kind of like, okay, yeah, they were two strangers who met and didn't end up being boyfriend girlfriend. Like, that's not that weird. And yet I felt like the author kept trying to force that of like, oh, but why didn't they get together? And it was like, because they only met for 5 hours. Like, obviously that's why they didn't get together. And he wasn't even from the same area. Like, that's not abnormal. That probably happens all the time. But that bothered me in itself as like a plot line. I didn't love the characters. I hated Fern, like, with a fiery passion. I've never hated a main character so much, I don't think. She just got on every last one of my nerves. She was so like full of herself and just like really talked down on anyone that didn't like the city. Like, she was better than them, and, you know, all the people from Muskoka were beneath her, even though she was literally like raised there. And she just, like, I really didn't like her entire vibe of being as a person. And that was just like not for me, you know? Like, I don't know if that was me, because like I said, it was personal for me because I actually went to school in downtown Toronto and absolutely hated the city. And like, I 100%, if you told me I could move to downtown Toronto or Muskoka, I would 1000% choose Muskoka every single time. Like, there is no world where I would want to live in downtown Toronto. And so listening to a character the entire book complaining about how she was just handed this resort in Muskoka was like really annoying to me. And I think because of the type of book this is, I think a lot of people will take issue with that, not just me because of my personal like ties to Toronto. But I think that when you're picking up a book with a cover like this in the summer, you're kind of expecting like a beach town, cottage, resort, you know, summery feeling kind of thing. Not someone who's constantly complaining about having to be in that small town or whatever. Like, you want someone who's actually like excited and doing all the fun things instead of whining about it. And so I don't think that will go over well with a lot of other readers either, even without the personal ties to Toronto. The thing that really did me in was there's a scene in this book where Fern's friend from Muskoka comes to visit her in downtown, and she makes some comment about, like, the friend says to her, oh, we don't have to go out and do anything in Toronto, I just came to visit you, and so we can just hang out in your apartment, like, it's totally fine. And Fern makes some like snarky comment about how this friend is just like a small town girl and she's scared of Toronto and it's not safe, and like it's totally safe because she knows everything. And that just like really bothered me, because one of the things I didn't like about Toronto was that I didn't feel safe there a lot of the times. And that's not me saying all of Toronto's like that. It's not. There are tons of places where you are perfectly safe in Toronto, but there are also areas that are higher crime rates. Like, that just is what it is. And one of the areas that was mentioned in this book in Toronto is one of the higher crime rate areas of Toronto. And so at that point I was kind of like, okay, not only is your comment rude, but it's now also like untrue, because you're not necessarily 100% safe, and it's that friend's total right to feel that way. And yet this main character was so like condescending to her about it, and just like, oh, she's just like too stupid, basically, like she hasn't seen the world, I'm so worldly and whatever. And it just like really hated her, like I said, right from the get-go. Didn't like her attitude about anything, didn't like the storyline. The guy was just like there, like I can't even really remember anything about him because he was just not interesting at all. And this was just like a huge letdown for me. Like I said, I loved Every Summer After. I thought it was so cool that we finally had like a good, like mainstream, doing really well romance written in like an Ontario cottage country area. Like that was so cool to me, but this was just like awful. Honestly, I hated this book. And I'm so glad I didn't buy a physical copy, because I almost did, because I love the cover of it. I love that it's pink. I love that we got the painted one this time instead of the other cover that we got last time. But I'm like so glad I didn't buy it, because this was just so not good. It's definitely something I will never reread or revisit, because I really hated it. Next, I requested the audiobook arc of Accidental Attachment by Max Monroe, and this one was a big like learning lesson for me, I guess. I requested this book because I went through like a huge binge of watching a ton of book hauls on YouTube, and I kept seeing this book come up. Like everybody seemed to have it, they were all talking about it, it sounded really good. So I requested it, I got it, I listened to it, and when I was done I was kind of like, okay, like what were they seeing in this book that I wasn't? Because I really didn't love this one. And I went to look at the reviews and I realized that every single person that I had watched a video that hauled this hadn't actually read it. They were just sent it from the PR company, and I was like, okay, like that's why. And you know, I just assumed because I kept seeing the book around that it was good, and that was like entirely my fault for making that assumption. But really it was just that the PR company sent a copy to practically everyone. This one follows a girl who is an author, and she is writing a paranormal romance series, I think, and she's on like the 5th or 6th book, and she needs to submit it, and she's just like not happy with it, but she's writing a fan fiction on the side about her editor. And so she's kind of bouncing him back and forth between these two documents, and she ends up accidentally sending him the fan fiction instead of the book when it's time to turn it in. And he immediately is like, this is great, I want to publish this, like this is the best thing you've ever written. She's kind of worried he's going to notice that it's about him and it's not, you know, just like a fictional book necessarily. And the book is very long, spans 13 hours on audio, and nothing really happens in that 13 hours. They end up going on, I think it's like some kind of book tour. They're like living on like a motor home together basically for most of the book, and he has no idea it's about him for like the entire book. I originally thought when I picked this book up that he was going to know instantly. Like as soon as she sent it to him, he was going to know, and that's how the story was going to play out. But he literally did not know, like at any point. He read this thing like 6 times and still didn't realize it was him. And I feel like that just made the book itself boring, because I wasn't like, oh my gosh, when's he going to find out? Because I was like, dude's already read it 6 times. He hasn't taken the hint, you know? And on top of that, one thing, I've read 2 books like this year, this was the second, that I really hated this in it. But this girl's best friend is a dog, which is fine. Like I get, you know, people love their pets. I'm a dog person myself. But like this was excessive to the point that there were like entire conversations between her and the dog, and she was constantly talking about what he was wearing or buying him clothes. And there's even like a side plot where she is looking for a doggy girlfriend for him online on Facebook, and I was just like so beyond over that. Like I said, I read another book like that, and I'm just like, there's being an animal lover, and then there's just like being obsessive. And this book crossed that line. Didn't like that. I prefer my people in books to have like actual friends that they talk to. Or like at the very least, even if the dog's her best friend, like I don't need play-by-play conversations between the two of them. And so that would have been nice. This girl spent way too much time thinking about the dog, talking about the dog, talking to the dog. I just really didn't care. And like I said, we spent 13 hours really getting nowhere. We kind of go in a circle over and over again of like, oh no, I sent him the wrong manuscript. And then they like get a little bit closer, but then she's like, oh, but I still sent him the wrong manuscript. And like, it just kept going around and around and nothing was happening. And I just really didn't love this one. I think I gave this 2.5 stars maybe. I just really was bored through most of this, to be honest. Next, I read Yours Truly by Abbi Jimenez, which I did really like. I know a lot of people have been hyping this one up lately. This one follows Brianna and Jacob, and they are both doctors in the same hospital. Brianna's been working there for years, and Jacob has just transferred into the hospital. She immediately like hates him on sight because she thinks he's after the job that she wants, and he has no idea, you know, why she's being so rude to him and things, but they just like get off on the wrong foot. She thinks he's super standoffish and like rude, but he really just has anxiety. And I really loved this book. This guy was like the prime example of a cinnamon roll hero. Like, he was truly like the sweetest person ever, and like, not for the sake of recognition. Like, he would do nice things totally anonymously just because he wanted people to be happy, and he was just so nice. Like, I literally loved him in this book. I need to go back and read Abbi Jimenez's backlist. I don't know if they're as good. I haven't heard like as great of things about her earlier stuff. Like, I've seen some mixed reviews, but I've also heard like some people really love them. So I don't know, but this like current series is really good. I loved Part of Your World too, and they're just both like really good. This one, like I said, really good, kind of sort of enemies to lovers sort of thing, because she's such a jerk to him at the beginning, but they're also like best friends, I feel like, for a lot of this, and there's definitely some fake dating in here as well. The anxiety rep in this is also super good and very realistic. I find sometimes like authors will just be like, oh, this character has anxiety, and then it never comes up in the book ever. But this one had a lot of examples of like moments where he would like overthink things. Like, there's a scene where he is planning to eat with her for the first time, I think, and they eat in like this like storage closet, and he immediately starts like spiraling through this like thought spiral of all the different things he shouldn't eat. Like, he's like, oh, this will be too crunchy, this will smell too bad, I can't do this. Like, he's going through this whole list of like every food option, and he can't, like, he's vetoing everything because he just thinks like, oh, this will be too messy, I'll spill this on myself, like this, that. And it was just so like relatable that I thought it was really funny. But I did really like that as well. I loved the book in general. It was super good. I highly recommend this one. Next was Manhunt by Vanessa Vale. I've never read anything from this author before, so I really had no idea what to expect. This was another one I got an ARC from, even though this book had been out for a while. But I got the ARC on NetGalley, and I think I would have liked this if I had known what it was going into it. I thought this was going to be like a very, you know, detailed, plot-driven, small-town romance, and it was not. It was like 80% smut, which, like I said, I was not prepared for. I was thinking that I was going to get like a full romance plotline, and there really wasn't, which, like I said, isn't bad if you know that that's what you're getting into. But I did have some other issues with this book. The main one being that the entire book spans like, I think, a week, and they're already kind of like, oh, I'm so in love with them, and like, I can't live without them, and I need to see them. And I'm like, okay, you've literally known each other for 5 minutes. Like, it was just very over the top right from the get-go. And there were certain times where they would even mention like, I can't believe I only met him 2 days ago. And I was like, girl, me either. Like, you're acting like you've been together for 3 years now. And it was just like so weird in that area. Like, I don't know why the author didn't just make it span more time, because that would have made more sense to me, but that was just the way it was. I also didn't like that the guy in this seemed to mansplain to her a lot for no reason, which I think is funny because there's actually a book in this series called Mansplain, but there's a scene in here where he's talking to his brothers, and she is literally in the room with them when they're having this conversation, and he walks over to her after he's done talking to his brothers, and he's like, oh, they just said this, and she's like, yeah, I know, I heard. But then he keeps telling her more of what they said. Like, she literally just told him that she heard what they said. She heard the whole conversation because she was sitting right there, and he still proceeds to tell her again as if she's not going to be able to comprehend it unless he tells it to her. And I found that that was done a couple times in this. He also starts calling her baby, like literally the first time they meet. She spills coffee on him, and immediately he starts calling her baby, and I was just like, yeah, not really feeling that either. And so I didn't love this one. I think I gave this one 3 stars, maybe 2.5. I don't remember exactly. But like I said, if you know what you're getting into, if you know it's like basically just smut, then you'll probably have a good time with this. But if you're looking for like a serious, like small town, plot driven, you know, scenery set sort of book, this is not going to be it for you. And lastly, I read The Love Wager by Lynn Painter. This is the second book in the Mr. Wrong Number that's not what the series is called. It's something, that's the first book, I think. And maybe that's what the series is called, I don't know, but it's like the second book to that. And this one follows a girl who has a one-night stand with a guy who's in a wedding party. She is a bartender at the wedding. He is, I think, either the best man or one of the groomsmen or something. And he ends up breaking up with his girlfriend at the wedding. And the two of them end up hooking up that night. And afterwards, she, like, crawls out of his hotel room in the morning and sort of plans to never see him again. And I don't know if it's, like, a couple days later or, like, a week or two later or whatever, but she decides that she is going to totally, like, revamp her whole life. She's gonna get an adult job, she's gonna, like, you know, change her hair and, like, start dating and, like, all these things. She's gonna move, she's gonna just be, like, a grown-up, basically, is her plan. And part of that is, like I said, dating. And she ends up sort of bumping into him on a dating app. She sees him again come up, and she sort of was planning to never see him again. And I think he sends her a message, and she's sort of like, yep, we were not supposed to be together, like, that's just how it is. And so they start agreeing that they are going to go on, like, separate dates together. Like, she's going to go out with other guys, he's going to go out with other girls, but then they're going to meet up to get tacos after each date that doesn't go well. And so they start doing that after every bad date that they have, and obviously over time they're becoming best friends and getting a lot closer, and they start realizing, like, they're the only ones that they want to hang out with. This one was very short, I felt like. It seemed to end pretty abruptly, but it was pretty cute, and I did enjoy it for what it was. And so that is everything I read this month. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. I do new book videos every single week, and I will see you next time.